What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Nourish with Renata podcast. Today, I'm so excited because I recently bonded with this amazing woman and fellow nutritionist, nutrition coach, and we literally hit it off because we were both like, yes, loving your cycle is one of the best things we ever did for our health and for our fertility. And so I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you to Bonnie. How's it going?
Hi, it's great. Thank you for that awesome introduction. And I'm sure we'll dive into this later, but 100% agree. Like we bonded right away talking about periods, which we grew up not really talking so much about. So I'm excited to get into that.
Yes. Okay. So, first of all, we got to let everyone know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure, of course. So my name is Bonnie. I go by Bonnie Lee. And I am a holistic PCOS and fertility nutritionist. And so I help women primarily with PCOS to reverse symptoms, completely live a symptom-free life with PCOS in a way that feels good. And so doing that and getting PCOS under control is what helps them to lose that weight that is so hard to lose with PCOS. It helps them get their energy back so that they can really handle their daily lives. And it helps them to finally get pregnant because they're restoring their periods, which are generally missing for a really long time with PCOS. And so I do also work with women who are just struggling with fertility as a whole. But PCOS is definitely my specialty because of my own history.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's dive into that. I would love for you to share a little bit about your PCOS journey as much as you feel comfortable. And of course, explaining what is PCOS.
Sure. So I'll start by explaining what PCOS is. So what it is, it's a genetic predisposition. So it is a set of genes that a lot of women have. They say about 1 in 10, but estimates are more like 1 in 8, and just a lot are undiagnosed. And so the interesting thing about this genetic predisposition is that if anybody has ever heard of epigenetics, I'm going to try not to get too technical here, but epigenetics is the study of how genes are turned on and off. And so with PCOS and that set of genes that we have, we can turn them on and off with our diet and lifestyle. And so this is really where like people might be totally fine for a certain amount of their lives, and then they go on birth control, or they have a really poor lifestyle through college or through being a mother, and all of a sudden they have a much harder time and their cycles go haywire, and all of a sudden they have PCOS and they like don't understand like where it came from. Or you have people who just dealt with it their entire lives since they were young teenagers, right? But so my whole journey here, I started having really awful periods when they first started, when I was 12. And I just went on the pill like most people do. My doctor said, okay, this is how you're going to manage it. And I stayed on the pill for 12 years. I went off when I was 28 and ready to get pregnant, assuming that like we're always told it's very easy to get pregnant. We spend our whole young lives trying to avoid pregnancy. And then all of a sudden it wasn't happening for me. And so I go off the pill, and a few months later, my cycles just were disappearing. So my periods weren't coming for like 2 to 3 months at a time. So I was like taking pregnancy tests constantly, right? I was like, I must be there. No, I was not. And then I got this cystic acne that popped up all over my chin and my neck. And I was like, I'm 28. This is not okay. And so I went to my doctor and explained the periods, and she saw my face and she was like, we better do an ultrasound. So luckily I had a doctor who recognized it right away. And they found cysts coating both of my ovaries.
Mm.
And so long story short, they just told me to go back on the pill to manage symptoms or come back after a year of trying to conceive to get fertility treatment. Those were the options, right? And it just didn't sit well with me because when I got my diagnosis, my doctor was like, oh, well, you're always going to have these symptoms unless you're on the pill. You're always going to struggle with infertility. Oh, and by the way, you have a higher chance of getting endometrial cancer. And I was just like, You basically dropped this bomb on me that my future is over, that I'm always going to struggle with this. And I had a hard time accepting it, which was a good thing. So I went and did a bunch of research. I found other people who had gotten pregnant with it and were managing it. And I was like, okay. So I followed the influencers and their recommendations, which I didn't love, but they at least helped a little bit. After 2 years, I finally got pregnant. I had an early miscarriage. And I was fed up with waiting. My husband's in the military. He was going to deploy soon. And I was like, oh my God, like this timeline just keeps stretching out and stretching out. So I went ahead and tried Clomid for 3 months to force ovulation because I still wasn't ovulating regularly. And I did that. And by month 3, I had black period blood.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was my biggest sign that I cannot just skip to the finish line. I was like, I need to figure this out and just learn about my cycles and my body and take care of myself, because this is not worth it to me to damage my body. I was like, if pregnancy happens later on, fine. But if not, that's okay. I'm just going to take care of myself. So I did. I read all the books. I learned about my body. I reversed PCOS completely. And I, from then on, had 30-day predictable cycles with no symptoms. And when my husband got back from his deployment and I had been taking care of myself for 6 months, got pregnant on the first try, did it again with baby number 2. And now I help other women do the same thing.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh. Literally, when you said you had black period blood, like I had chills over my whole body.
It was shocking. I was so freaked out by it. And of course, like, I'm expecting like a positive pregnancy test because I had been taking these pills, and like it was my last chance before my husband was deploying, right? He had already left, and then black blood happens. And it was so traumatizing for me. That moment was enough for me to really want myself and other women to try to take a natural route before doing anything else, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's what resonates so strongly with me because, I've heard many women share their stories with me through the coaching space about PCOS and about infertility. And it can definitely seem, just like you said, there's basically a no hope kind of future ahead of you. You're going to struggle with these symptoms with no discernible way of improving them, according to many medical practitioners. And you're going to have, and I spoke about this with you before we started recording, but my favorite diagnosis of like unexplained infertility.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's everywhere. And it's what I hear from women all the time. I swear almost every woman I talk to has had the exact same experience with their doctors just saying like, one, basically you're screwed. Here's something to bandage it in the meantime,
Yes.
and that's the end of story. And so they feel really helpless, and they do the same thing I did. They look for information about PCOS because they don't know much about it. They find some influencers who give some umbrella approaches that might help a little bit, but really aren't getting to the root of like inner healing, and so I think that's what makes my path a bit different and what I share differently with other people.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm also curious because we talked about the importance of learning your body and loving your cycle. And I know that you had mentioned to me before, like there are some key books that
Mhm.
really were like the opening of the doors, you could say, in terms of developing, I'm going to guess your approach, but also like your root cause method to
Mhm.
helping women solve their PCOS issues.
Yes, exactly. So the first book that I read was actually a traditional Chinese medicine book on infertility. It's called The Infertility Cure.
Okay.
Um, and that was my biggest eye opener because it talked a lot about menstrual cycles and like the different phases and kind of what happens differently with your body at different times in your cycle. And I was just like, I never really knew anything about any of this. And so then I guess as I was doing PCOS research, I came across Elisa Vitti because she has PCOS. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to check out her book, Woman Code. And that changed my life.
Yes.
I learned so much, and there were just so many moments in there that I was like, well, of course, like, why don't I know about all of this? Why isn't this women's wisdom that is passed through the generations? Because we've always had periods, you know?
Yes,
We
funnily
always,
enough. Yeah.
yeah. So like, how is it possible that so many of us grow up not knowing a dang thing about it and just
Right.
thinking that it's this awful thing that women have to just put up with, you know, when it really is what powers our bodies and makes us so unique and it creates life, you know? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that book completely changed my life with just learning about my cycle from the get-go, tracking things, and cycle syncing. That was honestly probably the biggest game changer for me because it taught me to reel things in and to stop just pushing all the time, like this kind of male dominated schedule. I always expected more of myself. And then when I read that book, I was like, oh, I can take a break during my period. Like, and I can listen to my energy and notice that, like, okay, I'm low today. I'm not going to push it, you know? That was huge for me. And it seems to be for all of my clients too. We just work ourselves to the bone, and really tuning into your cycle and just your language of your body. If you're not even getting a period at all, just like listening to yourself on a daily basis is something that not many women are very good at doing. But it can completely change the trajectory of our lives because we have to listen to our bodies to know what it's asking for and what it actually needs for us to improve our health, because we really don't need to get everything from outside sources. Your body is telling you everything already, you know?
Yes. Yes. I think this is why we bonded so quickly because I'm you're just speaking my language. You're preaching to
Yes.
the choir over here.
Glad to hear it.
Well, you spoke about stress, and that is one of the things I've definitely noticed in our society. The way that we've all grown up for women around about our age is it's all about productivity. It's
Mhm.
all about getting stuff done constantly over or outworking someone else. And I think, for me, because of the chronic stress that we've experienced for a multitude of decades, whether it be from work, relationships, having multiple kids at a young age, or, whatever the case may be, it's that component of stress that I think is really throwing many women's hormones out of whack.
It is.
Yeah. And so I'm actually really curious to hear from you because I think this applies to both PCOS and infertility. How do you broach the subject with your clients in a way that helps them to feel, okay, yes, I'm listening to my body, I'm noticing I'm stressed out, but how do I actually implement stress management or stress reduction techniques that work?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I tend to have them just like start from a clean slate. And so I just, rather than putting it all into stress reduction techniques, we focus on the little practices you can implement to nourish and nurture your body on a daily basis, right?
Mm,
And so I have them scale it back and first focus on just getting in better food, more balanced plates, getting in a wider array of nutrients in their body. Um, and most of my clients, I just have them start off with walking. I'm like, you know what?
mm,
You need to scale it back. Just walk for the first week. I only have them do 20 minutes a day. And I say, walk outside in the sunshine, either in the morning or during your lunch break, whatever you can make work if the weather allows for it. And I swear this first shift is such a game changer for people. They are literally like, oh my God, my energy is so much better. Like I'm feeling brighter and happier just from shifting their nutrition and going outside and walking, right? And then they're like, you know what? I have the energy to add in a little bit more exercise. Whereas beforehand, they were exercising out of depletion, where like
mm.
they just felt like it was such a chore every day. They're not loving it, which none of us are going to stick to long term, right? And that's really your body's sign that you're pushing it too hard if it's saying, no, I don't want this, right? So starting over and like scaling it back and then slowly adding little things and seeing how it feels, see where it works in your schedule. And just doing these little things. And I just tell them like, tune in. If you are planning to work out 3 times this week, but on one of the days you're really just feeling awful, you didn't sleep well, that's okay. Just go for a walk that day. And just doing these little things. And I also tell them, like, if they're getting their period on the first 2 days, at least, just go ahead and take a little staycation. And I just give them permission to relax a little bit. And just doing that, like,
Yeah.
takes so much weight off of their shoulders and makes them feel better about the whole process. And so it just comes more naturally.
Yes. And I love that as a foundational practice too, because you can see how that can be like your baseline for wherever you're at in your cycle. So, for instance, like you said, when it's day 1, 2 of your menstruation phase, if you need a staycation, do it. Honor your body and what it's telling you. And then what's awesome is that even at a minimum, if days 3, 4, 5, you start walking, you're doing your 15, 20 minutes again, you're nourishing your body, then you can always build up from there as your energy levels and mood increase. So that's like a perfect foundation. I love that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I teach them the things from Woman Code 2, and her other book, In the Flow, about how there are certain times that they should be eating more. Like, if your body
Yeah.
is hungry, it's because you actually need more. And talking about the fact that pushing yourself outside of what your body wants can backfire and actually cause them to hold on to more weight. And just hearing that
Yes.
is like, oh, well, I'm just screwing myself over by pushing it. And that it makes them really feel better about slowing down.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that too, because I had a very similar experience with a PCOS client where, we've all been taught calories, 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 calories in, calories out, right?
Mhm.
And I just remember, and you probably have had a similar experience. She was asking me, like, well, I've been eating like way more than I usually do, and I'm losing weight, but shouldn't I be counting calories?
Exactly. That's why I don't have my clients track calories. They don't track macros. We don't do any of that stuff. I just teach them to build a more balanced plate and get more vegetables in their diet. And I also say that, like, it's okay if you want to have some flexibility. Like, this is an 80-20 thing. And like, what if you want to have a glass of wine or a slice of pie or whatever, don't get mad at yourself, because you already did everything you needed to do to nourish your body. And now you get to play a little bit and your body's going to be okay. And they always will message me like, oh my gosh, for this first time, like, I had a pasta and I didn't feel bad afterwards because I followed your guidelines here and here. And I'm like, great. And then they start to see those signs from their body that, like, they're doing the right thing and following the right path, and they have that flexibility and can feel good about it.
Oh, I love that. That's literally music to my ears when women get out of like that shame cycle, that guilt cycle, into
Mhm.
that like celebratory, congratulatory, like, oh my gosh, look at all the great things I'm doing for myself.
Yeah. And what's amazing is that I, just by following these approaches and taking it easy, my clients lose at least 12 pounds across 12 weeks, which is a sustainable amount to lose. And we don't do any tracking. It's all just stuff that's like falling off. Meanwhile, they're like getting their energy levels up, they're getting their periods back. And so this is what is so foundational about all of this. It's just getting back to the core of like what your body needs on the most basic level. And that's what allows you to thrive.
Oh, I love that so much. Okay, I want to make sure that we spend time talking about fertility specifically as well,
Okay.
because I know that there are so many women that are currently feeling challenged by this. And particularly in terms of your approach and your journey, obviously with PCOS, that can make infertility so much more at top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, for any woman that's out there that's like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm resonating, I have PCOS, or I suspect I do, and maybe the doctors have told me something very similar, what would be your guidance for them in terms of, starting that fertility journey?
Ooh, oh my goodness. Well, if their doctors are up for it, this is the problem is, doctors say no a lot to the silliest things. It's always good to at least get lab tests so that you can get a better picture of what's going on. However, that being said, my big problem with lab testing is most of the women who go through lab testing come back, they hear from their doctors and the doctors say, oh, it's all in the normal range. Well,
Oh,
Yes, the normal range, but everybody in America is sick and has chronic illnesses. Like, so great, you're in that range. Like, but there's an optimal range too. And so that's what's really hard about lab testing. I more so like lab testing just to find out if like there's something else outside of PCOS, like if you have some sort of thyroid issue, if your adrenal stress index is really high, to kind of know what's going on with blood sugar, to see like how bad that baseline is. Things like that are really nice to start off. But when it comes to like estrogen levels, testosterone, progesterone, they're almost always going to say, oh, you're in the normal range, which like frustrates me so much. So, but it's good to just know if there's anything going on like outside of the standard PCOS issues. And then really just waiting on treatment. Everybody is so worried about a timeline, right? And that is always what stresses people out the most about fertility. They're like, oh my God, this is taking too long. I can't wait any longer. I was planning on having kids 3 years ago. I need this to happen now. But like, why? Like really asking yourself, is that what matters? Because that kind of approach is what makes people jump into IVF before anything else. And if people go through fertility treatment, fine, not a big deal. But to use it as a band-aid and a way to just skip ahead, those problems are still going to be there after they have that baby, you know? And just skipping ahead can also mean that they have a harder time with their pregnancies. And this has been studied, is that anybody who goes through ART, they have much higher rates of pregnancy issues, early term birth, all of those things. So it's really important to slow down and just take care of your health first. Put yourself first. And so with all my one-on-one clients, I actually ask them to try not to get pregnant for 3 months. I say, we're spending 3 months just putting you first and focusing on you feeling like your absolute best self, because your body needs to feel like you are safe and happy in order to make the space to invite a new life into your world, you know?
Yes.
And it's such a game changer. And a lot of the time they're really shocked. They're like, you want this is a fertility program, you don't want me to try. But it's so important that you really feel safe and happy in your body, or else your body's going to say like, you don't have time for this. You don't have the nutrition, the energy, any of it. Like you're not ready, you know?
Yeah.
So that's my big thing there, is just slow down, put yourself first for a little while. And if you're in the space where you're thriving, your periods are back, you're feeling awesome, and pregnancy's still not happening for you, then you might want to look into the other options, and then you'll have better chances of success then too.
I love that guidance. It's so simple and so effective. And yet it's still one of those things that so many women feel like, what? I have to put myself first?
Right. And I mean, it's an important lifelong practice, because if you're already putting everything first, you're kind of starting from anxiety mode, and then you're throwing a baby into the mix, and you like never figured out who you are and what you need. And it just elongates the issue. So
yeah, 100%. And also to your point, and I really want to emphasize this, by skipping to the end, so to speak, like it is really, really important to make note of the potential issues that you could have throughout pregnancy, early term birth, just like you mentioned, and also specifically in the postpartum space, like that can also be much more challenging if you haven't had the time and space to look after yourself first.
exactly. Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, I've read the studies on it. It's just not worth it to skip ahead before repairing yourself first.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not worth it for you or your baby.
100%. Okay. So I want to end with a couple more questions, specifically because we both love talking about cycles so much.
Sounds good.
So, especially for a woman that might be listening to this episode, watching this episode, and she's like, okay, so you talked about how I got to love my cycle, but how do I actually do that? What would be like your top 3 tips for that?
Ooh, start tracking.
Yes.
On your own. Don't just take an app's advice on everything. You can use an app, but like know what it's actually telling you, and know that what it's saying about ovulation predictions and stuff are likely wrong. So
Yes.
track it and know what you're tracking. Um, Two, pay attention and learn about the phases. So once you start tracking your cycle, you can figure out when each of the 4 phases is. And doing that will really help you listen to your body a little bit more and understand what it's asking for and what you should be doing differently in terms of nutrition, exercise, how much you're pushing yourself at work. And 3, like honestly, using that period as an excuse for a little staycation has become my favorite thing, because it's like, it turns it from something that you dread into like, oh, this is my excuse to just relax for a few days and just like honor the fact that your body is working really hard. So you don't have to, it's okay to
Yes.
take a break. And once you reach that point, like, your cycle, the phases, your period is a time of relaxation, like doing those things, I think really makes you appreciate your cycle and feel good about it.
Yes. And I want to dive into that last tip, because I think for many women who might be working full time, have like a bunch of kids at home, the idea of a staycation seems like a distant dream. So how do you actually implement that when it's day 1 and 2 and you're like, oh, but I got all these things? I feel like so many women are feeling that challenge of like, I know I need to put myself first, but I also have all these responsibilities.
Yeah. Well, so I find that cycle syncing as a whole helps that, because if you are following the phases and you are like starting projects in your follicular phase and then doing the social things in your ovulatory phase and wrapping everything up as much as possible during the luteal phase, then you actually have more space in your schedule to reel things in, maybe not work so hard at work. Obviously, this kind of depends on the type of job you do. But if you're doing like a desk-based job or anything like that, then you can feel good about the fact that like you wrapped up your projects. Now you can do some like menial work that's not going to be so difficult. Moms, this is much harder. I have definitely struggled in this area, especially with 2 under 2 and like having to go to the bathroom and they're like in there with me and it's messy and I'm like, oh my God, this is the worst thing.
Yes.
But just, I mean, those are the days that like I say, if the kids need to play a little bit more on their own while I just sit there, it's gonna be okay. It's not gonna ruin their lives if you're not stimulating their brains 24/7. And like the free play is good for them anyway, it's gonna
Yeah.
be all right. So just give yourself a little bit of grace. Stop always expecting yourself to perform at the top for yourself and your kids. Like they're gonna make it for a few days. And you can always get back into being your badass mom self when you're feeling up to it.
Yeah, I love that guidance. And also, I will say asking for help is a big one.
Yes.
So whether it's like another mom friend and like you guys totally get it, and maybe like the other mom takes the kids when it's your day 1 or vice versa, or communicating with your partner about how your menstruation phase just started, like you would really love some additional help, perhaps when they get home from work or in the morning times. The
Yes.
communication, the asking for help is key.
I agree. And that is something that I do. I would say that like day 2 is generally my lowest energy day, and my heaviest day. And so, yes, usually that's when I say like, hubby, I need some help today. Like I physically can't handle this right now. And I'm going to need you to take one for the team and watch the kids
Yes, yes.
today,
So
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I love all of the info, the tips that you shared in today's episode. And I want to make sure that people know how to get in contact with you too, because I love your approach to nutrition. It's so easy in terms of like, we're not talking about complicated, like carb cycling or, tracking macros and micros, none of that. So please let everyone know how they can contact you.
Of course. Yeah. Right now I am just on Instagram at Bonnie Lee Nutrition. I'm working on a website. Hopefully it'll be up soon. But yeah, right now it's on Instagram. And I've got some programs to go through that you can find on there. But if you're just not sure where to start with anything or just need some advice, you can DM me anytime.
Yes, and you have amazing posts about PCOS and infertility, and there's just so much value in your post. So definitely, guys, go and click on the link below to go to Bonnie's IG. And then my very last question for you is, what would be your greatest nutritional guidance for women who are really wanting to tune into their cycles, to nourish their bodies, and to live their happiest and healthiest lives?
Ooh, I would say, oh my God, one piece of advice is hard. Um, Honestly, I think my biggest thing is going from a balanced plate approach. Um,
Mm,
and so what this means is doing, if you look at a dinner plate and you got half of a plate of vegetables, a quarter of a plate of protein, a quarter of starchy carbs, and these should be from um, gosh, I'm losing words, from more non-processed sources. So you want more of like your quinoa, brown rice, sweet potatoes, things like that, rather than white rice, bread. Like we want to try to stick to better sources for our food.
mm.
So balanced plate, half veggies, one quarter protein, one quarter carb, and then added fat. And I don't say just a dash of fat like some, because good sources of omega-3s are really, really important for your cycle. And I hate when people feel like they have to limit the amount of fat, right? So add in half an avocado, whatever it's going to take for you to like fill up and feel good. And that is really the biggest hallmark to just getting better at getting nutrients in your diet, and giving yourself some flexibility too. And then your energy goes up. It gets easier to take care of yourself, and you start getting rid of symptoms naturally this way. I mean, it's so, so simple. And it really is what's going to allow you to tune into what's going on with your cycle, rather than just hearing the buzz of all of these symptoms that are coming from the food that you're eating.
I love that. We have like the exact same approach when it comes to balance plates, which I love. And it's so amazing the transformation that people can feel when they just focus on that one thing alone. And so, guys, if you haven't done the balance plate approach, definitely do that because it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It has changed my life and literally all my clients. It's a game changer.
Oh, incredible. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Bonnie. It's been so wonderful to speak to you.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, guys, make sure to share this episode out on your social media with someone you love, with another woman that might be experiencing some of the things that we talked about today. This is literally an info packed episode, and I know you're going to want to come back and listen to it again. But in the meantime, have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next episode.